Did you tear your ACL and you're about to have ACL surgery? We're going to go over what the whole ACL rehab process looks like from the beginning to the end. My name is Dr. Mark Lopez, Doctor of Physical Therapy and Certified Strength and Conditioning Specialist and co-founder of the Basketball Doctors. So you decided to have surgery. We're going to go over the entire recovery process for that ACL journey per se. Initial phase, right after surgery to going back to the court for the first time after surgery. During this recovery process, we're going to break it up into guidelines/phases as opposed to timelines. We don't like timelines, but a lot of people give timelines. So timelines mean like, hey, at month 3, you should go back to running. At month 6, you should go back to cutting. At month 9, you should go back to basketball doing drills. But we don't like those because everyone has a different recovery. And a lot of people don't just have an ACL reconstruction. They might have meniscus, or they also might have a MCL tear. So we go by guidelines, meaning you need to hit these certain checkpoints, and here are little phases that you need to hit. That way, those phases, you know, hey, these are my main goals. And it might take a little longer, but we're getting to the main goal of going back to sport. But let's break it up into these phases, and let's start in phase number 1. First phase is the one right after surgery, day 1. So what happens here is, I kind of like to call it the fundamental phase, also the homeostasis phase, but we just want to get the knee to calm down, decrease that swelling, get your range of motion back, get that walking back, get those quads working, hamstrings, glutes, calves working. So the first one is getting that swelling to calm down. Make sure you're compressing it, icing it, elevating, just get that swelling to calm down, because if we don't get the swelling to calm down, we can't move on to the next one. We're getting our range of motion back, because if the knee's just ballooned up, we can't work on bending, we can't work on getting the knee straight. So decrease the swelling, then we're gonna be working on getting your range of motion back, bending your knee, getting your knee straight. And once we get that, then we start working on getting those muscles activated. We get the quad working, we get the glutes, the hamstrings, the calves. Just wake them up, because you'll see that they're inhibited after surgery because of the swelling, the pain. So we just need to wake them up just by activating them, squeezing them. Just doing isometric contractions play a huge role. Once we get those, then we start working on your walking. Normalize the walking, maybe using 2 crutches at first, then 1 crutch, then no crutches. But this is the phase where we really need to stick to the fundamentals. And this is a very important phase, which I kind of tell people, this might be even more important than return to sport, because if you can't get the fundamentals down, it's going to impact you all the way down. You can't believe how many times we have athletes come into our clinic 6 months after surgery, and they're like, hey, my knee hurts, my walking's off. And we see, oh, they can't get their knee straight. And this is something that had to be addressed in the initial phase. And then now back to running, back to jumping, and they can't even get their knee straight. So making sure you get this phase down, that way the next phases are a little bit easier on you. All right, guys, now that the knees calm down, we're going to phase number 2. This is a fun phase. This is the strength phase. So really getting our muscles strong here and getting us ready for the next stage. So here we've achieved our range of motion. Our knee swelling's calmed down. So now we're working on getting functional strength. So we're going to start off with double leg movements, and we're going to go in those big compound movements initially, like the squat, the double leg squat, the hinge. Then we're going to go into a lunge. Then we're going to go into an RDL. So all these movements that we're going to do, we're going to go from 2 legs to 1 leg. Then we're also going to progress to different planes of motion. So not only just going forward, but side to side, rotational, just getting strong in every plane of motion, working on those single leg patterns. And we're also not only doing these compound movements, but we're also doing these isolated single leg movements. So really targeting the quads isometrically, or, you know, even the knee extensions or hamstring curls, calf raises. So not just like these functional movements, but also isolation to really pinpoint and maximize our strength, because we want to be as close as we can to the uninvolved leg in order to us to go into this next phase. All right, guys, in this phase, this is the fun phase, but also the scary phase. So the previous phase, we got our base level of strength, single leg strength. So now our strength should be almost equal. Obviously it's not gonna be equal, but fairly in the same range. Now we're getting ready to that running, jumping activities. But before that, we wanna work on your pre-running, pre-jumping activities. In this kind of phase, we're working on our eccentric control, our ability to withstand those loads fast and rapidly. Also making sure our tolerance and the capacity of our knee can handle these activities. So we're all setting you up for your body to be ready to go back into jumping and running. Because once you get medically cleared, that doesn't mean you're ready to be cleared to running. That just means the graft is ready to tolerate that, but your body, your muscles might not be ready. So this is where we go into all those pre-running, pre-jumping, those snap downs. We have great videos of ACL different rehabs on pre-running activities, pre-jumping, if you click in the description below. But this is where we really make sure we're ready to handle those loads. So once we're ready to handle those loads, then we go into those hops, those bounds, those single leg, different planes of motion. So we all work on kind of the same thing that we mentioned before. We go from double leg to single leg, then we go forward and back to side to rotational, just getting every position and pattern ready, because in our next phase, we need to be ready to go into more of those sports specific. So here, this is more that dynamic, and it is a very scary phase because a lot of people have trouble jumping with one leg or running. So this is all where we have to hammer this out before we go into the next phase. All right, guys, stage number 4. This is a fun one. I know I said that in the previous ones, but this one we're going on to the basketball court. We're doing more basketball specific. Not necessarily on the court, but we do it in our facility, but we also sometimes go to the court. But in this phase, we really want to break down the game of basketball and all these movement patterns and make sure you're comfortable in doing these movement patterns. So we're going to go over cutting. We're going to go over defensive breakdowns. We're going to go over defensive slides. So all these movements that we do on the court, we're doing in isolation here in a controlled environment before we go into that chaotic environment. And during those movements, we're maximizing our mechanics, making sure you're not putting yourself at risk for another injury. This is very important for those that had that non-contact injury to make sure, hey, everything's optimized, I'm decreasing my risk. And all this can't be done without the previous phase, because the previous phase, we go over the jumping, the different planes of motion. So this is all going to set you up for the need to handle these loads. And now we're just breaking down those movements, building off of those movements, and building up the intensity of those movements as well. So this is just, think about, hey, basketball just broken down into different parts in order for us to go into the next phase to make sure we've seen everything that we're going to see in the court and the rehab, and we're confident in those movements before we go into the next phase. All right, guys, the final phase, you're almost there. So here's the return to sport, return to play. So here in this phase, we're going to first start off with return to sport testing. So we're going to test out, we're going to do a bunch of tests. We have specific tests for basketball athletes that we use with our athletes, but we're looking at, just going to give you some examples: single leg, triple hop, checking your strength. It has to be very close to your other one. Check your movement pattern, seeing how you're cutting, seeing how you're jumping. So there's a lot of battery of tests, and we also do questionnaires to make sure you're ready to go back to sport/play. But this isn't going to be the only time you do it. So you might fail it here, but we're reworking with the physical therapist this entire time as well. So PT doesn't stop here at the return to sport, because here you're going back to your individual drills, but you're also working with your physical therapist to, fine tune some mechanics. If you're doing some drills with your trainer and you don't feel as comfortable, okay, let's revisit that in the clinic and make sure you're doing the right things. But whenever we're in this return to sport phase, we're making sure we're doing all this in a controlled environment first. You're going non-contact, maybe you do some one-on-ones, but we want to slowly keep that environment closed, and we open it up even more and more, and we start adding more people in the picture. So starting off with that one-on-one, like I mentioned, 2-on-2, 3-on-3, half court, 4-on-4, half court, 5-on-5, half court. Then we go full court. And during this entire phase, we want to make sure our knee doesn't have any adverse reactions. We probably will have some swelling, some soreness. We want to make sure we're taking the right steps to address those. If my knee swells up too much, I maybe just did too much and I'm not ready to go to 5-on-5, or I'm not ready to play for more than an hour. So that's why you're working with the physical therapist the entire time and to manage your load. I know that's a weird word, especially with Kawhi Leonard, that kind of made that word famous, but you really have to have some load management as you're going back to sport, back to play, because you want to make sure the knee's ready to handle all these loads. Because if you think about it, these past 9 months, you haven't been playing full court basketball or anything. So you want to slowly work your way up there. And that's why working with the physical therapist is critical, to make sure, like, hey, I had a little hiccup. All right, let's just take it easy this day. You maybe did too much. Let's work on this. So you're having someone to guide you through this process when you're going back to play. And just remember, this process doesn't start before 9 months. A lot of the time, some people get cleared before 9 months. On my recommendation, just based on the research, you don't want to go back to play before 9 months. because the longer you wait after 9 months, it lowers your risk for re-tears, and we don't want your to re-tear your ACL going back to sport too early. So that's why we need to do the testing, make sure you're doing all the drills the right way, and then you go to the return of play. And like I mentioned, this is a continuum. It's going to take a little while, but this is just think about it as your preseason ramping up for the full season and everything ahead. All right, guys, hopefully you guys learned a lot about the different phases. So I'm just going to give you guys a quick little summary. So the first phase, the homeostasis, the second phase, the strength phase, the third phase, the dynamic phase, the fourth phase, that's when we're going into more sports specific drills. The fifth phase, return to sport/play. The reason we broke it down into phases, guys, as opposed to timelines, is because every person is different. Every ACL journey is going to be different from every single person because one, the surgery itself, someone might have torn their ACL and their meniscus. Someone might have had a meniscus repair. Someone might have torn their MCL. So the injury itself has different recovery process. Someone might have had done prehab versus someone that didn't. So these are all factors that affect. That's why we want to do these phases. And some people might just have trouble getting their range of motion. That's why we make sure that we're hitting our goals within those phases, take our time and really hit them, because every phase makes the next phase easier. And if we don't get that previous phase done, this is just going to affect the next phase, and it's going to impair our mechanics, impair our strength. So you really got to make sure this is phase driven as opposed to timeline. I know a lot of people get the timeline of, hey, at 3 months, we need to be running. But is your body ready to run? Your ligament might be ready, but your muscles, you haven't been doing pre-running, pre-jumping activities, that might affect it. And then normally some people get cleared at 10 months, 9 months. That just means you're ready to go back into sport specific. Doesn't mean you are ready to go back to full competition. So make sure you follow these phases to really guide your rehab process. If you guys have any questions regarding these phases, comment below, send us an email. If you want to work with us, we work with a lot of athletes online and in person here in Southern California, Los Angeles, and Orange County. So just make sure you're going through phases. And if your physical therapist or your doctor just gives you these timelines, just make sure you use those as a backbone, but use the phases as the main guideline, okay? So we are the Basketball Doctors. Let's ball for life.